consultations platform that serves essentially the NHS. So we're used by 97% of GP practices across the country and hundreds of thousands of NHS staff in trusts as well every single week. We're here today to talk about ambient voice technology. I've just seen on the next slide, we've got some interesting colorways where this is transferred across from Google Slides to PowerPoint. But essentially, the reason we're here to talk about ambient voice technology and its kind of application in healthcare is that the NHS staff spend nearly a third of their day, every single day, on admin. And that contributes to stuff like burnout, low morale, but it also takes away from the time that they could be spending doing what they love most, which is delivering care to patients. It's no surprise then that kind of ambient voice technology is one of the first areas or applications of AI in healthcare that's really becoming commoditized, because it essentially supports clinicians to reduce the time they spend kind of taking notes by recording and transcribing their consultations or interactions with patients and other members of the MDT, and then generating the downstream notes or documentation that they need to make. It gives them back that time to focus on the patient, not on the computers they're taking notes. So Accurate Scribe is our MDT solution, and it's powered by a company called Tandem, and we're going to give you a very quick demonstration in a minute just to show you kind of the potential of this product. For those of you who are kind of a bit into this space already, you'll be aware that NHS England recently released some guidance around ABT technology and how it could be applied, how it should be applied in the NHS. We're happy to say that we meet all of that guidance, and we're happy to answer questions about this after the talk. A bit of context about where we are now. We came to market with this solution probably about 6 weeks ago. We already have over 2,000 NHS providers using Accurate Scribe every single week, and they're completing kind of 30,000 consultations or interactions using Accurate Scribe every single week already. This kind of shows the opportunity and the pull from the system for this technology. You don't often work on technologies that have that kind of pull from the NHS, but it's really exciting to be part of. And we're supporting some innovative pilots beyond kind of the traditional GP or outpatient settings that people think of when they think about ABT technology. So we're supporting, for instance, ward rounds in critical care in Oxford, the front door of the emergency department in Coventry and Warwickshire, or district nursing and home visits with Norfolk Community. Quick shameless plug before the demo, we are offering for those who work within the NHS free pilots of our solution, so come and find us and have a talk about that if you're interested beyond this.
And we now apologise in advance for our poor acting skills, but we're going to go into a little bit of the demo. So we're going to start the consultation, and you can see the orb in the centre, just checking you can see it, and that shows that it's listening. And this is sort of to demonstrate that when your patient comes in the room, you can have chats about how their day's been, how their journey was, how parking was outside, and this won't necessarily pull into the scribe. Before you start, you would want to check that you have selected the right template for your care setting. So we have a huge repository of these, but this is constantly growing, and we're working with our partners to develop more of these as we go. And you would want to check that the right microphone is listening into your consultation. So before the consultation, I'm going to sort of say to the scribe, I've got some blood results for the record. So the hemoglobin is 129, ferritin is 28, and albumin is 38, so all within normal range. And then my patient is going to come into the room, and we're going to start. So, hi Mr. Latimer, I'm Dr. Allen. I wanted to let you know that I'm using an AI ambient scribe tool today that will listen in and document our clinical notes. Are you okay with this?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Perfect. So can I just confirm your full name and date of birth?
Yeah, so it's Ben Latimer, 2nd of 11th, 1993.
Perfect. And I understand you've had some ongoing bowel symptoms recently, mainly diarrhoea, cramps and some bleeding. So we have done some bloods, and I know you've had a scope, which might help to examine what is going on. But first of all, tell me a little bit more about what's been happening and your perspective, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So it started a few months ago, but it's been getting a bit worse lately. I'm going to the toilet a lot, and I've lost some weight, maybe a couple of kilograms. There's been a mixture of kind of fresh and old blood sometimes, but not every time.
Okay, and any fevers or joint pain, eye issues or skin rashes at all?
No, none of those, just very tired and not much appetite actually.
Okay, are you on any regular medications or have any allergies?
No to both of those.
Perfect, and any family history of bowel problems at all?
No. Oh, actually, I think my uncle might have Crohn's disease.
Okay, that's helpful to know, thank you. So I'm just going to examine you if that's okay. And I'm just going to speak aloud so that the scribe can hear my findings, but also you get to know what's going on as well. Today I can see your abdomen's a little tender when I palpate, mainly on the lower left side. You now weigh 71 kilos, so actually yeah, you have lost some weight, about 4 kilos over the past 6 months. Your vitals are normal, your heart rate is 75, BP, blood pressure of 120/80, temp of 37, and oxygen saturations of 98% on air. And I can't see any signs of joint or skin involvement. I've also got some of your results that I've reviewed. So some of the ones that have come back a little bit abnormal. In your colonoscopy, the camera test showed inflammation and some small ulcers in the lower part of your large bowel, mainly on the left side. Your CRP also came back at 24, which is a bit raised, which indicates inflammation. And your fecal calprotectin is 670, which is also a bit high, which does confirm bowel inflammation. So the biopsies have sort of confirmed ulcerative colitis, which is a type of inflammatory bowel disease. It is long term, but we will help you manage it, and it's not caused by any infection or cancer.
Okay, what's the next steps?
So we're going to start you on some tablets called mesalazine. This is to reduce inflammation, along with some rectal foam at night for better localised effect. And then we'll check your response for this in a few weeks, and if it doesn't settle, we may add a short course of steroids. You'll also be linked in with our IBD nurse team, and they'll help advise and support your GP, and we'll repeat your bloods in 4 weeks and manage your prescriptions from there. So we're going to cut there because I think you'll get the point, but actually that consultation in adult settings would obviously go on for a lot longer. In particular, in the mental health setting, we do have consultations that go on for a number of hours, and it can capture that as well. But for the benefit of today, we will do that. So we paused the encounter. I'm going to finish and create the note. And what you will see here is that the transcription is being completed. Wi-Fi wants to do its thing. So what we will also show you in a second actually is once the patient's left the room, if you do want to add anything to the note, you can do that using this add or adjust button. You can also add and change things once you've actually reviewed the note itself. So you'll see here the history. I'll let you have a little read through to actually see what it has taken, the medication, no known allergies, family history, the investigations that I read out, the results of the endoscopy, other investigations, etc. So it's done all the measurements as well, and this will code as SNOMED codes into the record. We are building a bigger repository of SNOMED codes also, and then it will give the plan. So for example, if I want to add or adjust, I can say, please can you add to the record that the patient has an allergy to penicillin, and I will stop that and then enter it into the note, and it will regionally update the note to add that in there as well, and it will highlight in blue to show the part that is changed as well. So it's changed allergy to penicillin. So this is obviously to go into the medical note, but you can create onward documents as well. So actually you can summarise it for the benefit of the patient. You can send a letter back to the GP. You can send an onward referral letter, and there's a various range of onward letters that we can do there as well. And you'll see here it's just creating, and it will change it into the format that is right for whatever that onward comms you have selected here. So the platform that we're showing you today is our non-integrated platform. So this means that you can then copy the note, and you can then paste it into the patient record. We do always have an integrated system as well, which works exactly the same. Which at the moment we have full integrations with EMIS and System 1, but are building those out into other EPRs more into the acute setting. But if we were in that integrated space, it would just be one click and it would save into that patient note as well.
Does this all happen locally? And if it doesn't, is the data anonymised before it's encrypted and sent elsewhere? And if that happens, what happens to that data? And is it stored or shared with anybody else?
So the recording is essentially it's transcribed live, and the recording is disposed of, so that's gone. Then that transcription, the product kind of anonymises it all before it sends it out to OpenAI or wherever, so that the models that it uses to generate the transcription and the summary, etc. And so then when it's returned, it then puts the kind of the data back in as it then places it back into the product. So it's, yeah, no data, no kind of patient data is shared with kind of the models, and all patient data is kind of stored, like managed within the product, as per GDPR. So it's like Microsoft Azure servers in the EU essentially is kind of the main service for this part of the product.
So I saw in one of your slides that the app has been fully safety assessed. So I wanted to ask, what are the major risks that have been identified?
I guess by safety assessed, so to be clear that like NHS England has released a lot of guidance that they then put out to trusts to say that you or the healthcare providers to say you need to make sure your solutions meet this. We're obviously working with each trust to ensure that we meet their interpretation of that. But one of the things that is key and isn't just relying on the trust, it's stuff like medical device regular certification. So Accurate Scribe, which is powered by Tandem, is a medical device and has kind of met all of the conditions to be that. And actually we want to go further. So at the moment it's kind of 1A, but we want to go to kind of 2 beyond as the functionality.
I'm Goran Edic, I'm Professor of Computer Science here at the University of Manchester, and I'm going to talk about the topic of validation of clinical LLMs. This is probably a topic we can spend the whole day on. I'll really try to have a really quick overview of what I think are the most important things. So this is not going to be probably as optimistic talk and topic as the others today, but I think we also need to keep an eye on that. So during the day you will probably see so many different applications of clinical language models that can assist clinicians in different ways. I will very briefly mention these 3 areas for administrative assistance, as we have seen, or you have seen with booking appointments and workflow management. Clinical decision support, where you can summarize the records, do the chatting with the electronic health records. So recently you have chat EHR. Managing communications, as we have just seen, so generation of documentation, helping patients understand the things that are in the record and answer their queries. As I think the previous talk mentioned, a lot of time is indeed spent on documentation, and if you look here, this is how much time people actually used to spend on generating narrative notes, and that's quite a lot of time, right? So this is the percentage here. So half of the time they are writing their notes, half of their time of documentation, of making documentations. Other areas where clinical language models are really useful are to support epidemiological research, so transforming large-scale electronic health records into something that you can use for research, but also for training and education. That's probably a big topic as well, where you can do simulation and allow your students to train using clinical models. That's all nice, and I'm sure people will talk about that. But how do we validate the models, right? So what we know is that language models, clinical and others, learn 2 kind of things, right? So one is what we call formal competence, so they can speak English nicely, they can pretend to be very verbose in that. But there is also functional competence, where we need to see whether the language models also have the understanding and, or at least showing the understanding of what has been discussed. And that's a big problem. So the language models, clinical in particular, need to be sure that this the functional competence has to be met. Therefore, there is a huge, really, challenge in trying to validate clinical models. The numbers of clinical language models is really growing, I would say, exponentially. There are hundreds of them. It's a weekly job. There is always a new model coming out on the market, and that's and most of the validations that we have are what I would call ad hoc validations, where you have mostly clinical language tests, where you say how good this language model is for a very specific, well-defined benchmark that is mostly technical, rather than how useful and how meaningful that is. One of the examples of that is answering this is exam QA questions, and models have been really tested on that. How well, particularly for the US medical licensing examination, they can answer the questions. And if you see from 2020, they started with 33%, they're now over 90%. But is that enough, right? So someone has said recently that would you trust someone who has passed their theory test, driving test, trust them that they're going to drive you, right? So they haven't done any driving experience. So this is how it looks like, right? So language models are good. So this is potentially inflating expectations of language models, right? You have someone who is doing 90% on clinical exams. I'll give a couple of examples where this needs to be taken into account. So this is another positive example, if you want. So if you ask language models to suggest differential diagnosis in the emergency department, research has shown that language models can do that on par with clinicians, right? So something like, if I remember correctly, 87% of accuracy, that the correct diagnosis is in the top 5. This is very much what clinicians would do. So that's again good news. But the question is, what kind of 800 minus 87, so 23% of errors the model makes? Are these rare diseases? Are they life-threatening cases? So making an error on a very life-threatening condition is not the same as, you know, recording something slightly wrong. Whether the patient was 45 or 46 years old. Another example is automatic clinical coding. So it was mentioned earlier. So we've done here in Manchester a lot of work on automated clinical coding, mapping to SNOMED CT from clinical notes. And if you look at how well people and computers do that, so the language models, so this is not exact science. Clinicians only agree 75% of time. So 1 in 4 codes are not the same when you ask 2 clinicians to do that. AI approaches are typically 10 to 50% lower than that. Is that good enough? And you might say it's not, right? It's around 60%. That's not really good. But then depending on the task, this might be absolutely fine. So here is just one example that we've been working on. For example, if you have a particular disease, this is the right code. I'm not going to read any of these because they're difficult, right? So this is the right code to code it. But if you go to any parents of this code, it's clinically still correct, right? It's just a more generic code. And it is correct for a task, if you have a specific task, to identify a sub-cohort of patients with a particular disease, this one, you'll still get the right cohort of people. So although clinical coding is not ideal, 60-65% maximum, you can still get 95% of cohort accuracy for selecting the people with a particular disease, which is good. So you have two options, right? You have sometimes very high levels of testing of the outcomes that are not necessarily clinically relevant, and then sometimes a very low level of evaluation that is clinically possibly more useful. Because of that, the community has moved very much into doing task-specific evaluation of clinical readiness of language models. I'll just mention here one of these recent, so this is from last month, where a number of language models have been tested against 5 task categories and 22 different tasks. And these are the 9 models that have been looked at. The best model, doesn't matter the right, it's not advert at all, but the best model, for example, the best 2 models were DeepSeek and 4.0, maybe was it? No, 3.0, I think it was, where it's talking here. Okay, so based on 2 different approaches, these were the 2 best models. But more importantly, what I would like just to highlight a couple of things. First of all, so these 2 models are best performing, but they are more expensive. So you need to take that into account. We do know that NHS in particular do not have a lot of resources. So for example, Claude performs pretty on par with them, but it is significantly cheaper. If you are interested in which tasks of the 5 that I mentioned earlier, the models really perform well, so they are, red means bad, so they are really bad on administrative tasks and good in clinical node generation, so what we've heard recently, so this is the area where they are really doing well, and also patient communication and education. So these are the tasks where the models really perform well. A thing to watch, most of these models are large language models. What about small language models? So this is the thing that is really important at the moment, right? So people are looking, how can we retrain smaller language models and infuse some knowledge so that they perform as well. If you look how they perform, they don't really perform as well as large language models, right? So if you remember, 90% is what I mentioned earlier. Look, this is 50, 50, the red is the question answering for exams. 50, 50, 75. Anyway, 2 more points that we need to really think about when we are talking about validation of clinical models. Transparency in model design. So we've heard the previous question, what's happening, where the data goes, what data has been used to train the model, how it is updated. Are the models safe? Are they unbiased? Are they going to do any harm? Do they have any stereotypes, errors, hallucinations? Are they all the same or not? How to validate that systematically is a question, right? Most of the research at the moment and validations are pretty much at home. Trust in providers of language models. We've heard OpenAI. Most of the tested model, if you look at this, they're closed and they're from big companies. Probably something that is inevitable, but we, and as a community, need to really be careful on thinking, is the whole NHS AI going to be powered by the 1 or 2 big companies? And then they changed the CEO on Friday, and it goes down over the weekend, and you don't know whether you're going to be able to run it on Monday. So that's a big thing to think about. If you see only these 2 models are open, everything else is closed, right? So you're tied into particular models if you go for big. Resource challenges, I mentioned that. It is, many people say, in NHS in particular, it's eye-watering how much it costs to run these models. If you look at these just benchmarks that I mentioned earlier, that compare 9 models only, 9 models. It costs every time they update their tables, it costs $12,000. Right, so it's not a huge amount, but it is just updating the tables, $12,000. And the big thing is, it is really about people. Do you have the right people in the right places? I don't really think that AI will replace people, but people who do not use AI will most certainly be replaced by people who do not use AI. So I don't have a conclusion really, so this is a very fluid topic, but I would like to just say a couple of words on that it is pretty promising. So AI and clinical language models are pretty promising, they're pretty disruptive, as we can see, we have seen and will see today, can change a lot of things. But continuous validation is a must, right? So this is not something we can just say, well, once we bought a piece of software, that's it, we are happy with that. So it needs to be considered as a means, and this thing here, I really like that we should be, the right question we should be asking is, what a human and AI model can do together, rather than what one of them can do better than the other.
When we test humans about whether they're competent to work clinically, one typical way we do that is via an exam. And I suppose in a hypothetical exam, we might have questions over a range of topics, but perhaps only one question on each topic. And if the human answers those correctly, we infer that they're kind of capable to practice across the whole range. People have suggested that we could actually test clinical large language models by using human exams, but is it fair, because they have a different thought or reasoning process, to assume that if they can answer a question on a subtopic accurately, that they can answer across the whole range of clinical knowledge? And is there a risk, for example, in rare diseases?
Absolutely. I think answering questions, exam questions, is only the ticket to start practicing, right? You wouldn't, as a junior doctor, I assume, you pass the exam, you start practicing, but then you're building your experience, you're still learning. Clinical language models are now tuned to answer exam questions, and I think that's really misleading. They can answer questions very well, but whether they're going to deal with rare cases, are they going to deal with unseen circumstances, that's a big question. So validating that is the key, but there are no good ways to do that, because all the benchmarks that are around, all the questions have been seen by language models. Right? So you're basically asking them to answer the question that they're most likely they have seen while they were trained.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yu Tong Zhang, and I'm the iTap project manager, and I'll be introducing how iTap could help adopt innovative technologies within our trust. iTap stands for the Innovative Technology Adoption Program, which is a structured pipeline developed by Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust to help us adopt market-ready technologies more efficiently and effectively. It's actually born out of learning from a previous program which was supported by the Health Foundation that helped us explore how to embed innovation at a trust level. And that work really highlighted the need for a clearer, scalable and more consistent way for adopting innovations within a large NHS trust like MFT. Building on that foundation, iTap was then developed to be a more joined-up approach that brings together clinical engagement, governance and operational support in a way that enables real-world adoption. It's designed to support both internal MFT staff members and external innovators and partners, like many of you here today, to adopt innovative technologies. At the core of iTap is a clear focus on alignment with MFT's strategic priorities, and we typically prioritize innovations that can help us address some of the most important challenges within MFT. Such as those that can contribute to streamline patient flow, which is to support the efficient movement of patients through their care journey by reducing hospital admissions and smooth transition between different care services, reducing waiting time, and enabling early discharge from hospital, as well as enabling the left shift to the community and providing care closer to patients' home. Then increase productivity by freeing up staff time whilst maintaining or even improving the quality of care that we deliver. Then improve cancer performance by providing faster cancer diagnosis, better cancer treatment and better experience for patients. And importantly, we consider tackling health inequalities as a cross-cutting priority across everything we support, because we want to make sure that our patients can receive the care they need regardless of their background or identity. So these priority areas really reflect the challenges and ambitions of MFT, because they help us ensure that any innovation supported by iTap delivers meaningful value to our patients, our staff and our services. iTap is specifically focused on supporting the adoption of technologies that can be implemented in a real-world setting. That means solutions should already have relevant and essential criteria, such as those listed on the screen here, so that they can be safely and also efficiently adopted within our trust. We understand that engaging with a large NHS trust like MFT can be really, really challenging, because there are lots of teams, lots of processes, but usually there's no clear starting point and there's no clear route. And iTap addresses those challenges by providing a single front door, and this really offers a coordinated way for partners to engage with the right people and in the right way. We also provide comprehensive project management support and help to navigate the internal processes within MFT, from clinical engagement to governance and to operational planning, etc. iTap can also help facilitate accelerated implementation by coordinating the right people, right processes and right systems to help and support successful adoption. So what does the iTap process actually looks like in practice? It starts with a single front door in the form of an online inquiry form that can be submitted by both internal staff members and external innovators. And once submitted, the iTap core team carries out an initial eligibility check to look at whether it aligns with MFT priorities and whether it's ready to be for its potential adoption. If a proposal doesn't meet the criteria, we will always provide a feedback, including a clear rationale, and if possible, we'll find a way to signpost the proposal to alternative pathways. Where proposals do progress, they are then reviewed by the iTap operational group, which is a multidisciplinary team with expertise across, for example, digital services, research team, procurement, etc., and also clinical areas. So this group drives delivery and helps ensure innovations are supported for adoption into our routine service. Then the iTap operational group will recommend innovations to the iTap Oversight Board, which is chaired by our Chief Executive Officer, Mark Coven, and Chief Digital and Information Officer, David Wallaker, and also includes senior leaders across, for example, strategy, delivery, improvement, commercial, etc., etc. At this stage, it will provide senior visibility and also a mandate to proceed to full project development. Even though this process looks linear, but actually the point at which an innovation enters the process really depends on its maturity. So for example, some innovations might need more early evaluation, whereas some other innovations might be closer to their adoption into routine service. And this slide shows the support package that iTap provides throughout the adoption process. Firstly, during scoping, we assess whether the innovation aligns with trust priorities and whether they've got all the relevant evidence and feasibility in place for to progress. And then in implementation, we coordinate the right people and processes to support the safe and effective delivery of the MFT. Evaluation is where we gather all the data, including both quantitative and qualitative, and also user feedback to understand how an innovation is performing in practice. And finally, in sustainability, this is where we will help the local department to build a business case and also build a plan for the long-term adoption if an innovation delivers its expected value and can be adopted at a larger scale if applicable, and can also be sustained in the future, because we want to make sure that an innovation doesn't just deliver immediate benefits but also can be sustainable in the long term. So if you are interested in exploring how we can work together, here's our email address, or if you'd like to know more about iTap, you can scan this QR code that will take you to our website, including the online inquiry form if you wish to submit your innovation to iTap, and we'd be very happy to start that conversation with you.
Maybe just a quick question on how does some of the developments that you want to sustain with an MFT get to the wider national problem, and how do you, without giving away your USP and all the things that you need to do, I can see that. How do you get some of this capability up nationally and get to a place where you can check and balance? Are other trusts doing the same thing? Where can we share and bring the national effort to one?
So, thank you. At the moment, because this is still a very young program, we only just launched this in May this year. At the moment, our focus is just within MFT's footprint locally. So if something's beyond MFT, if this innovation can be adopted at a larger scale, at national level, for example, we might need to engage with our partners in the same ecosystem, for example, health innovation networks, because they have more capability and capacity to enable that. But specifically for iTap at the moment, that's kind of beyond our capability at the moment, but we are connected with our partners within the ecosystem.
So, as Ian mentioned, I work at the UK Health Security Agency, which is the UK's public health body, and I'm going to discuss some of our work about how we deploy currently large language models and evaluate them for public health activities. So the first thing to note is that back in 2023, when sort of large language models really took off with ChatGPT, we had an issue in that we obviously wanted to use these new tools, but we didn't necessarily have the ability to send our data off our systems, and also, as mentioned in previous talks, can be extremely expensive. And so we started developing internally our own LLM infrastructure, which allowed us to essentially download open weight models, not the models you might use to an AI API, but things like Meta's Llama 3 model, and run them internally on our network, on our high-performance computing clusters. I won't go into detail on this, but needless to say, everything sits within our network because of this setup, and that's kind of opened up more easily use cases that might involve PII data or patient data. And that particularly when, for example, during a public health response or incident, when we might need to process large volumes of data very quickly. So once you have this set up and you can run large language models internally, obviously a huge question that's been mentioned in previous talks is actually, are they any good and what can you use them for? And so a big part of the work that my team's done is how do we go about evaluating those large language models to identify the areas of public health they could be used in and how good it is at those tasks so that we can get experts in different areas of public health comfortable that these could really help them with their job. So to briefly go through sort of how we've gone about doing that, we've released a number of preprints sort of trying to build up the layers of complexity of what you can do with these general models. And the first layer that we started with were these classification and extraction tasks. So that's any task in public health where you have a fixed ground truth. So you can say, that's the correct diagnosis. Obviously that would be a more clinical example, but for example, that's the correct category of contact. That would be the correct disease that you've identified. And so you have an easy way, relatively easy way of saying whether the model's got it right or wrong. So we brought together 16 tasks, so a combination of both external academic benchmarks, like, for example, disease extraction, but also internal tasks like contact type classification, extracting symptoms from restaurant reviews, and other examples that are particularly relevant specifically for public health, so that we could get an idea of actually how well do they work on our data and on our tasks. And with these 16 tasks, we then set about evaluating the models we could run internally, to hopefully get an idea of which models we should run, which areas they could be useful in, and then try to quantify the potential risks around deploying them in those areas. And so this is just one example of what that sort of benchmark looks like. So the 16 tasks down the side, the 11 models, there's some more now along the top that we run internally, and then how we go about selecting which model, on average, we should be running on our high-performance computers. And this approach, because these are all relatively easy to evaluate and there's a fixed ground truth, every time a new model is released and on the internet, we can then go about downloading that model, running it, and seeing if we should actually be rolling over the model we're using internally to that task so that we can try to always have the best performance on the work that we're doing internally. So once you've gone and done those tasks, there's obviously a huge number of use cases that don't fit nicely into here's the exact right answer, here's the right disease, here's the right classification. And so the big question we had then is how do we start to move beyond those specific tasks into the broader areas like summarization, like responding to questions, or providing unstructured responses. And so the second big piece of work we did was starting to tackle that question with respect to our own internal guidance documents. So our organisation put over 1,000 documents on the Gov website that advises people on a whole range of public health. And with those documents, we can then, a really interesting question for us, which hasn't really been dealt with so far, is actually how much does an LLM know about what the government says the correct public health advice is. And so we developed a benchmark where we created 6,000 questions related to our internal guidance, both in the multiple choice question format, but also in the free-form chatbot-esque response format, and then tested a range of models, 24 in total, both using the multiple choice question format to see how much they knew when they had options, but also as a chatbot, if they gave a free-form response, how often would that response be consistent with the official document where we generated that question from. And again, the idea being that this should give us a high-level idea of which models we can trust more or less, both internally, but also, I think one particular question I didn't mention, is when someone in the public, for example, goes to ChatGPT and asks a public health question, versus going to Google and looks for the official documentation, what are the risks around this switch, and how often would the other models liable to potentially get that wrong versus a human looking. And so you'll note on here actually we've got some humans to take the test as well, to see how well they did, even with access to a cursory use of Google as a search engine. And you can see some models are already starting to get up there. Finally, I want to mention that obviously these two are very much general benchmarks to help us select models and identify the sort of overall risks and opportunities in public health. For any specific use case, for example, with one use case we're doing around detecting guidance discrepancies, we will then have additional evaluations at each step of the sort of application, whether that be classifying recommendations, the ability to retrieve relevant text, and then the ability to actually detect discrepancies. And this will be a bespoke evaluation set for that one particular task, if we're actually going to move into production and start using it. So very finally, just on, once you've got your models and you've now have a reasonable idea of which model you should be using and the potential risks and also the potential performance it can have, what are some example use cases we're actually thinking about within public health? And so very briefly, one that we published on was whether you can use large language models to detect references to gastrointestinal illness in online restaurant reviews. We obviously have lots of testing data for people who interact with the medical system, but often there's lots of missed cases but people may well report those symptoms online in restaurant reviews. And so one example was whether it was testing LLMs' ability to actually trawl through large volumes of restaurant reviews and identify potentially abnormal outbreaks of gastrointestinal illness. More recently, as I mentioned before, we've been looking at how we can use this to help make our guidance more reliable. So across those thousands of documents that are often updated very regularly in public health incidents, we started building a system that allowed epidemiologists and internal UKHSA staff to search over the entire corpus of our guidance, identify relevant texts across different documents, and then try to identify whether there were discrepancies between them. And the resulting application started to look something like this, where if you're developing a piece of guidance, you can input the guidance you're developing, it will search over all the guidance that we've currently published, and try to identify if anything you're saying is currently conflicting with what's already out there, so you can revise it. These are just two examples then. Obviously, as you can see from the number of tasks that we've collected and evaluated, there's a huge range of possibilities for how you could use this, particularly in an outbreak. For example, classifying contacts, for example, aiding surveillance systems where there's large quantities of free text in questionnaires, etc. And so hopefully this provides a relatively sort of structured approach to thinking about how you can integrate LLMs into those systems.
Hi Josh, I think it's really encouraging to see that you're developing a benchmark like that. And there probably are use cases for benchmarks in areas like research. I was talking to a colleague from cancer research earlier, and perhaps would you support cancer research benchmarking around clinical trials, for example?
So whether that will be for our team in terms of, or more of an NHS team, I know are also undertaking similar work, but I think I am a huge supporter of developing benchmarks for particular tasks, because as has been mentioned before, often the general exams that are on the internet have been not very overfitted to, and so yeah, I think that would be a very interesting use case, and actually very similar to some of the reviews that maybe we do in sort of literature reviews that we would do within internally to, for example, identify the sort of key parameters for a modelling study, etc. So there's definitely a lot of work within UKHSA looking at how we can use these tools to enhance the research we do and the literature reviews that we do.
Good morning, everyone. Anisha and I are joining you this morning from the MHRA. We're here to talk to you about the AI Airlock, the UK's first regulatory sandbox for testing AI as medical devices. And we're essentially looking at shaping the regulation of AI as a medical device. As mentioned, we're both from the MHRA, which is the UK's regulatory agency for blood components, medical devices and medicines, helping to meet the safety, quality and efficacy of all these products. A little bit about the AI Airlock program. So, as mentioned, it's a regulatory sandbox with the main objective really of looking at AIMD in real-world settings, working with real-world products, but also prototypes and products also at concept. We are testing the products in 3 environments in the Airlock. We have simulation environments where we're looking at, as mentioned, concepts through thought experiments and focus roundtable workshops. We're also working with products that are a little bit more developed, such as prototypes, in a research environment where we look at products in the virtual environment for looking at their test data and other questions for the products. And also in the real world Airlock environment, we are looking at products that are a little bit more mature, so products that are almost ready for registration, looking at challenges such as PCCPs, and also post-market surveillance of these products in a real-world setting. Our governance structure is consisting of the AI Airlock participant, which are the candidates who are bringing forward the AI, and then also we have the AI Airlock Supervisory Committee and the governance board as well, and we also have an overall program evaluation. I'll pass you to Anusha, who will talk to you more about the Airlock.
Thank you, Lorraine. Good morning, everyone. So as Lorraine mentioned, I will talk to you about the AI Airlock workflow, how we ran the program, and followed by a quick insight about the pilot cohort candidates and the challenges that they addressed, and finally about the publications that we intend to do. So we launched a call for application in September 2024, which involved around 40 submissions, each of which of different product types, different regulatory challenges, different development stages of the product. From the 40 submissions, we narrowed down to 4 pilot cohort candidates across various regulatory challenges. And once this pilot cohort was selected, we moved on to testing design phase, where we designed a test plan with the candidates. It was a kind of intense learning period for us and for the candidates. So we had to understand the product in depth and also the regulatory challenges that they have come up with. And we developed a test plan in collaboration. And then the test plan was approved and signed off, and we moved on to the test implementation phase, where the candidates implemented the test plans in a real-world or virtual environment, as Lorraine described earlier. And during this phase, the MHRA concentrated on doing a gap analysis of the regulatory standards that are already available. And we also did the simulation workshops, wherein we involved experts from the NHS, from the approved bodies, and also the candidates and the regulatory challenges, and we had roundtable discussions. Following this is exit and review, wherein the candidates have submitted their case study reports and their findings, along with their test plans and how they implemented the test plans. Now MHRA is doing the documentation of the findings and the program. Here, this is a brief slide about the candidates, and you can see the name of the candidates involved on the slides. And we addressed a lot of pressing challenges in AI, and especially in healthcare. For the first challenge was around generation of synthetic data using the LLMs, and they also looked at the evaluation of the synthetic data using the LLMs. The next one was around the hallucinations and non-determinisms in LLMs. As you are aware, LLM can be useful in a clinical context, but then the talk about hallucinations or non-determinism in LLM can pose a serious clinical risk. The next one looked at explainability, and we found that explainability will differ depending on the audience, depending on the user who are using the AI, especially in healthcare. There are different clinicians, different developers who use the AI, and the languages might differ, and the explainability and the extent of explainability will change accordingly. And the last candidate looked about real-time tracking of monitoring of AI performance and model drift. They also looked on the clinician oversight and bias due to overtrust and over-reliance of AI. Lastly, as I said, we'll be publishing 3 types of reports: a program report, which will be comprehension of the sandbox activities that we did, the recommendation, the testing done, and also the findings for the Airlock. The simulation report will have an insight into the workshops and discussions that were carried out, and the topics that were discussed during the workshop and the challenges. And finally, the overall program evaluation report will have the sandbox as such, from different perspectives of the stakeholders, the candidates, and the Airlock team. Thank you so much for your time. The time for a couple of questions.
Thank you so much. I want to ask if you have any plans to support the developers to test their digital health technologies within clinical trials.
This is basically a sandbox wherein we are looking into, we don't provide the test environment, so it's basically the candidates comes with this test environment, but around the developers, maybe I'll check that and get back to you.
So we know that humans can be flawed, but in predictable ways. we ensure that the decisions that the regulatory authority is making are regulated by humans and not AI? So is there a safeguard that people who are, or the system that is making the decision around regulation is not covered by AI itself?
Yeah, so I think that's something we're trying to address. So at the moment, we don't have a specific set of guidelines to say this is how you are evaluating, or this is the type of risk management you do for AI. So that's what we're trying to work in the Airlock. So here we did have, as you said, there is a human intervention required to monitor the AI, especially you cannot have over-reliance or over-trust on AI without that human oversight. So that's something we are trying to explore and see where we can give proper guidance to ensure that there is a human oversight.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ben Brown. I'm a GP partner in Salford. I'm a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Manchester in primary care and informatics, and I'm one of the co-founders and the chief medical officer of Patches Health. And I'm here to talk to you today about how we use AI triage in Patches in primary care. So first of all, what is triage and why do we need it? Well, over the past 10 to 20 years, the clinical workload on primary care and GP practices has been increasing a lot, and that's been combined with challenges in recruiting staff and retaining them whilst we've got them. So that's led to a big imbalance between the supply that we have available to deal with the increasing patient demand. So to use the limited resources that we have most efficiently and not to compromise patient safety, of course, one of the key things that we must do in primary care is make sure that patients are directed to the right person who can provide the right care at the right time. And that's essentially what triage is. But why do we need AI to help us with triage? Well, ideally triage is performed by a clinician. They're usually the most trained and medically qualified people in the practice. But given what I've said on the previous slide, that isn't always possible because there's so few of them. And often, as you'll be no doubt aware when you contact a GP practice, the initial triage is usually done by a receptionist who are excellent at what they do, but they're not medically trained. And that does have some drawbacks in regards to often safety and the workload that the receptionists have to do. And they're often doing jobs that they're not trained specifically to do. So our hypothesis that we wanted to test, or the research question was, can AI help? And of course we think it can. So Patches is an online consultation system. It came out of a research project between Patches and the University of Manchester. We also work with One Advanced, who are our delivery partners, so they look after implementation of Patches into the GP practices and support as well. So online consultation systems are pieces of software that allow patients to contact their GP practice online by filling out a form. They have been around for quite a while, but they are now contractually mandated for GP practices to have. So all GP practices should have an online consultation system available to their patients. So Patches has been around since 2020, just before the pandemic. We're commissioned in over 1,000 GP practices across the UK. And as you would expect, as a collaboration with the university, we are taking quite a very scientific approach to the development of our AI and how it's validated and rolled out. So we've done lots of user research first before we develop the AIs in terms of how we should best design the AIs and develop them. Here are some of the papers that we've published recently on the topic. Two of the big requirements that came out was that when patients were filling out these online consultation forms, they wanted to be able to communicate with their GPs in natural language. So they wanted to just type out and say in their own words exactly what they wanted help with. They didn't want to have to be forced to go through lots of multiple choice questions and questionnaires before they got the help. The other thing that the GP practices in particular and clinicians wanted was they wanted to make sure that the AI was highly sensitive and didn't miss any urgent or emergency cases. So those are the two key tenets that we kind of built into the system as we were developing it. So this is how Patches is accessed. This is actually my GP practice website. Most practices work in the same way. They have a banner on their website that that patients can click to access Patches. When they go into the Patches system, they can choose from 5 different options in terms of how to contact the practice. Is it a new problem, an ongoing health problem, admin request, medication request, or other? When they select an option, they're taken through to what we call a Patches chatbot, which asks open-ended questions of the patient, which they can then reply in their own words, describing why they're contacting the GP practice. Although we call it a chatbot, each question is asked one after the other. They're essentially a fixed form that changes depending on the type of query that's initially selected by the patient. But after the patient has answered, I think there are initially 6 mandatory and up to an additional 4 optional questions. The AIs will then analyse those answers, and they'll combine that with some of the demographic information about the patients, their age, their sex, and it will come up with some further recommendations and possible things that the AI may do based on those responses from the patient are ask further questions or ask the patient to fill out some questionnaires to gather more information to make a more nuanced triage decision. For example, if the patient mentions they have back pain, it may trigger a questionnaire that asks some more specific questions about their back pain. Similarly, if they have a sore throat or they mention depression, it could ask more questions of the patient. It could also send advice to the patient, for example, trying to support them to self-care if they've got something that doesn't need to be dealt with by a GP practice. It could signpost the patient to other services. For example, if they've got a medical emergency, it would signpost them to emergency services, it could signpost them to pharmacies or other local services that are set up by the practice or local organisations. And finally, the other thing it can do is it can offer the patients an appointment to book directly into the GP appointment diary. So if the practice has set up Patches in a way, it can book the patient directly in. For example, if they have a physiotherapist that they want to see in person, it can provide them with that link to book directly into the diary straight away. So completely taking out kind of the manual process of doing that. If the request does come through to the GP practice, if the patient hasn't been signposted away, for example, it enters an inbox. The AI will order the inbox based on clinical priority. So emergencies and urgents are flagged and are put to the top of the inbox. Patients that may require an in-person appointment are highlighted so they can be dealt with sooner as well or in a different way. And the AI can also workflow requests to specific team inboxes. For example, if you have a pharmacist working from a specific inbox or someone who is specialising in mental health care, the AI can determine whether the request is appropriate for them and just workflow it straight to them as well. When you open up a request, you can obviously see what the patient's written, but at the bottom, you can see the triage decisions that have been made by the AI, and they are all pre-populated for review by staff. The staff can then change them if they disagree, and we use that information to then monitor the accuracy of our AIs going forward, and it also feeds into the model updating as we do that periodically as well. This is just to show you the process that we go through when developing our AI models. So this is all the different steps. We don't always go through each one except for the last 3. So the model training we will do if we're building our own models and not ones that we're using off the shelf. But we usually do that through an approach called internal external cross-validation. We'll then do some prospective testing, both in the background of GP practices, but also live by giving it to our early adopters. We then do a head-to-head comparison versus experienced GPs, so giving the AI and the experienced GPs the same data set and then seeing how their accuracy compares. And then finally, we do large-scale randomized control trials and process evaluations to see the impact of the AI is actually having on patient care. So at the moment, we've got a large study funded by NIHR, which is the largest randomized control trial of AI in primary care that's happened never happened before, and that's currently in the follow-up period. We expect to have some results for that next year. So this is also to show you that these are the rigorous steps that we go through to register the AIs in patches as medical devices. So we have a UKHSA marking, and we also do publish the research from our funders down there in the left, and in collaboration with the University of Cambridge as well. So we actually have 4 different AI modules. Each of them can be enabled or disabled individually, or they can be combined and tailored by the practice with what we call the AI Care Navigator, so that the practice can actually combine different outputs from the different AIs to produce different triage actions. So for example, if they have a specific user that they would like to book in for specific appointments with their, as I mentioned before, a physiotherapist, they can combine the topics that are predicted by the AI with the urgency, for example, and say, well, only patients with routine back pain can be booked in to see our physiotherapist. And those are kind of very, very customizable. The other advantage of building our own AIs and having that pipeline where we can monitor the accuracy and safety is that we can quote live metrics on how well each of the AIs are performing. So you can see I've quoted some of the example metrics there on the slide, and each of them sound quite impressive on their own, though what we need is context around them and how well does that actually perform versus the human standard, which would be an experienced GP. And actually, as I've put at the bottom, we've done those head-to-head trials tests, and we know that actually a GP, an experienced GP, the AIs have a comparable performance to an experienced GP. And actually, the AI Care Navigator is very important for some upcoming changes in primary care in October. The GP practices will have to keep their online consultation system open all day, which often a lot of them don't do at the moment. And what they'll be able to do with our AI Care Navigator is able to assist patients when they're presenting with emergencies and urgent consultations, to signpost them to other places where they're unable to deal with them online in the practice. And that's it. I hope that's been informative about how we're using AI triage in primary care. Very happy to speak to any people that are interested. You've got both my email addresses there on screen. If you'd like to contact me and find out more about patches, more than happy to do that, and look forward to hearing from you.